All right, so today we're jumping into one of the most incredible growth stories in all of history, the rise of the early Christian church. We're going to use the book of Acts as our guide to figure out how a small, kind of forgotten movement on the edge of the Roman Empire turned into a global force that literally reshaped the world.
And that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? This story is all about explosive growth, radical change, and a historical impact that's hard to wrap your head around. I mean, this wasn't a movement with an army or a political machine behind it. Nope. It was driven by an idea. An idea that just caught fire and spread with this unstoppable momentum that honestly defied all logic. So let's get into it and see how it all went down.
Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to start with that first little spark right there in Jerusalem. Then we'll look at how, and this is a huge paradox, intense pressure actually made the movement spread like crazy. We'll meet the most unlikely character to ever add fuel to this fire. Then we'll hit that critical moment when the message broke out of its Jewish roots. And finally, we'll follow its journey right into the heart of the empire itself, Rome.
So our story kicks off in Jerusalem, right after Jesus has ascended. His followers are this small, probably terrified and confused group, just huddled together, waiting. They've been given one last, really crucial instruction, and it's going to define everything that happens next.
Now, this isn't just a simple timeline. It's a mission statement and a geographic strategy all rolled into one, laid out right in the first chapter. Jesus basically gives them a roadmap. You'll be my witnesses, starting here in Jerusalem, then moving out into the surrounding areas of Judea and Samaria, and from there to the very ends of the earth. Now, for someone in the Roman Empire, the ends of the earth meant the farthest reaches of their world. This one verse is basically the table of contents for the entire book of Acts. The rest of the story is just watching this incredible plan unfold.
So the moment of ignition happens at a Jewish festival called Pentecost. It was a harvest festival, which meant Jerusalem was packed with Jews from all over the Roman Empire. And what happens next isn't some clever marketing gimmick. It's a straight-up supernatural event. The Holy Spirit shows up, and suddenly the disciples can speak in all the different languages of the visitors. Just like that, the biggest barrier, language, is gone. It gets everyone's attention, and Peter stands up and gives the first Christian sermon ever. The response? It's mind-blowing. 3,000 people join the movement in one day. That's the Jerusalem spark.
And this right here, this was the core message. It wasn't some long, complicated philosophy. It was one single revolutionary claim. Jesus of Nazareth, the man who was just publicly executed by the Roman government, was alive. God had resurrected him. You have to understand, in a world where the emperor was sometimes seen as a god, saying that a crucified man from a backwater province was the true Lord, that wasn't just a religious statement. It was deeply political. It was dangerous. And this bold claim, backed up by people saying, "We saw him," was the theological engine that powered this entire movement.
So the spark is lit. The community in Jerusalem is growing like crazy. But a spark only turns into a wildfire if it has some wind to spread it. And for the early church, that wind came in the form of fierce, organized opposition.
So you have this incredible tension right from the start. On the inside, the community was all about radical unity and sharing everything they had. But on the outside, they faced immediate pushback. The Sanhedrin, the same religious leaders who condemned Jesus, saw this new movement as a huge threat, not just to their beliefs, but to the delicate political peace they had with Rome. So they arrested the apostles, they threatened them, they told them to stop talking about Jesus, period.
And this tension just keeps building until it finally boils over with a guy named Stephen. He was one of 7 Greek-speaking Jewish believers who was chosen to help with food distribution. But he was also an amazing and, frankly, uncompromising preacher. And his message was a direct challenge to the religious establishment and their focus on the physical temple.
Well, after Stephen gives this fiery speech, basically accusing the leadership of always rejecting God's messengers throughout history, they are enraged. They drag him out of the city and stone him to death. He becomes the very first Christian martyr. And standing there, watching it all, approving of the whole thing, was a young, passionate Pharisee named Saul. Stephen's death is a massive turning point. The conflict had just turned deadly.
So the attempt to stomp out this flame in Jerusalem? It backfired, spectacularly. The intense persecution that followed didn't crush the church, it scattered it. And this is where the Roman Empire accidentally becomes an ally. These scattered believers are traveling on Roman roads, speaking the common Greek language, and showing up in new cities where they can find Jewish synagogues to start from. The persecution gave them the push, but the empire gave them the highways for the fire to spread, into Judea and Samaria, just like the roadmap said it would.
Okay, so this persecution leads us to what is, hands down, the most unbelievable plot twist in the whole story. We're about to focus on the man who was leading the charge against the church, its number one enemy, and he's about to become its greatest champion. This is Saul of Tarsus. After Stephen's death, he basically becomes the chief persecutor. The book of Acts says he was breathing out murderous threats. He was going house to house, dragging men and women off to prison. I mean, this guy was on a mission to completely dismantle and destroy this new faith. But while he's on the road to the city of Damascus to hunt down even more of these believers, Saul has an encounter that doesn't just change his life, it changes the entire course of history.
This event is the absolute pivot point for the entire book of Acts. Saul, the persecutor-in-chief, has a direct personal encounter with the risen Jesus he'd been trying to silence. It leaves him physically blind, but for the first time, spiritually able to see. His transformation is instant and total. And think about it, Saul was uniquely qualified for this new job. He was a brilliant Pharisee who knew the scriptures backward and forward, and he was a Roman citizen from a Greek city, so he could move comfortably in both the Jewish and non-Jewish worlds. The wildfire now had its most powerful and most unexpected fuel.
So, up to this point, the movement has spread geographically, but it's still pretty much a Jewish thing. The next huge wall they have to break through is a cultural one, a theological one. The question is this message about a Jewish Messiah only for Jewish people, or is it for everyone?
The breakthrough comes from Peter, of all people. He has this vision where God basically tells him, stop calling other people unclean. At the exact same time, a Roman centurion named Cornelius, a guy who represents the power of Rome, is told to send for Peter. So Peter goes, he preaches, and Cornelius' whole non-Jewish household believes and gets baptized. For the Jewish believers, this was a mind-bending, radical event. God was officially working outside the nation of Israel.
Well, this experience forces a question that could have split the whole movement in two. Do non-Jews, Gentiles, have to become Jewish first to be accepted? Do they need to be circumcised and follow the law of Moses? So all the leaders get together in Jerusalem to debate it. Peter, Paul, and Barnabas all share stories of what God is doing among the Gentiles. And finally, James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, makes the call. He says no, Gentiles do not need to become Jews. This decision was basically Christianity's declaration of independence. It threw the doors wide open for the message to become a truly global movement.
With that question settled, the path is clear. And the Apostle Paul, the former persecutor, becomes the main guide to carry this message across the Roman Empire. He sets off on a whole series of strategic missionary journeys. And Paul had a playbook, and it was incredibly effective. He'd go into a big city and start at the local synagogue. That gave him an audience that already knew the scriptures he was talking about. Then, when opposition would inevitably pop up, he'd turn his focus to the city's non-Jewish population. The goal was to plant a new, thriving community of both Jewish and Gentile believers, and then he'd move on to the next city. This strategy created these self-sustaining hubs of the faith in key cities all over the empire, places like Ephesus, Corinth, and Thessalonica. But Paul's last trip is different. He gets arrested in Jerusalem on bogus charges. And he makes a brilliant move. As a Roman citizen, he has the right to appeal his case directly to Caesar. This means he has to go to Rome. The irony here is just incredible. The very Roman legal system that would one day persecute the church is now giving him a state-funded, military-escorted trip right to the heart of the empire. After a crazy shipwreck and a stop in Malta, Paul finally arrives in the capital. And this is how the book ends. It's such a powerful finish. Paul is under house arrest, literally chained to a Roman guard, but the message he's preaching, it's proclaimed without hindrance. The man is in chains, but the message is totally free, unstoppable. The wildfire that started as a tiny spark in Jerusalem has now reached the very center of the empire, fulfilling that mission roadmap from chapter 1.
And this brings us to one last brilliant thing about the book of Acts. The author doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow. We never find out what happens to Paul, or Peter, for that matter. And you have to ask why. It's because the book isn't really about them. It's about the unstoppable advance of the message. The open ending is intentional. It suggests that the story isn't finished. The movement that started with a handful of people in a room was now planted in the capital of the known world, ready for a future that would change everything. The story was really just getting started.